Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And joining me today would typically be Michael Becker, but the hardest working guy I know is closing another transaction. So sitting in with me today is Ricardo Hinojosa and Les Meisel, also with Old Capital. So before I kick it over to Ricardo, I want to introduce you to Nicole and Greg Scott. Nicole and Greg Scott. They are from Detroit, Michigan, and they own a little multifamily property up in the Detroit area that they just purchased a couple months ago. And I thought we'd just get a little bit of an insight about how they're doing, how they bought the property, and a little bit about their background. So guys, welcome to the podcast. And can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. My name is Greg Scott. I'm from Detroit area. I work for a large automotive company in the area. I have an engineering background, but I have 21 years experience in sales and marketing in automotive space. And now several years of real estate experience in both single family and multifamily.
I'm Nicole Scott. Thanks for having us here. I also work for a large automotive company in the Metro Detroit area. And I have about 16 years of background in finance and accounting. So that is my skill set. And like Greg mentioned, I also have acquired some real estate background in the past number of years with single family and now multifamily.
Well, hey guys, great to have you. I've known you guys for a little bit now, probably about a year. It's been great getting to know you, and I'm glad you guys stopped in. They made a special flight out from the Detroit, Michigan area, just to be with us here at Old Capital, right? So, no, they had some business in town, but I'm glad you guys allocated some time to spend with us. So long professional kind of history. You both work in the automotive industry. What got you into real estate? Let's just start there. How did that start?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us on. We're really honored to be here. But I think if you go back to the recession of 2007, our company was laying off people right and left. And we were trying to find ways to supplement our income, to have a fallback position. And so we looked at a number of different options, and it seemed like real estate was a good one. We originally actually tried flipping. We had a flip that actually kind of went sideways, but we ended up turning it into a rental. Mm-hmm. And after having a rental for a little while, we realized it wasn't that hard. Mm-hmm. So once we realized that having a rental wasn't that hard, we said, well, let's start going deeper into owning rental properties. But at the time, it seemed like it would be a mistake to invest in our backyard because Detroit was so depressed at that time. Mm-hmm. And we wanted something a little counter-cyclical to what we were doing. And so that was kind of the start. Anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think that about covers it. I mean, we wanted to diversify, basically. So we wanted to start doing something a little bit outside of our backyard, as Greg mentioned. And he started listening to real estate podcasts and, trying to soak up as much information as he could, and would gather some of the more interesting ones and have me listen to them as well.
So did you go further into single family? Did you continue with single family, or is that when you started kind of diverting your energy towards multifamily? Well,
and we again decided we didn't want to be in our backyard. So how do you invest in single family outside, right? Again, we're listening to podcasts. We discovered some turnkey organizations that sold turnkey rentals.
Okay.
And we started buying some properties around the country. At one point, we had 6 properties in 4 different states. And we were happy with the returns, but not really happy. And so we were trying to find ways to improve that even more. And I actually stumbled across another podcast from a real estate mentoring and education group down here in Texas that seemed to have a lot to offer. And so we became members of that. And sure enough, it did. We ended up buying 6 more properties here in the DFW area. Mm-hmm. But this education and mentoring group also educated about multifamily, which was really our first exposure to it. And after coming down here for 2 or 3 years, mostly for single family, but also coming for meetings where they were talking about multifamily, we just realized that there was a big opportunity there.
So what are some of the things that drew you away from single family into multifamily?
Well, the first thing is deploying capital. You can deploy a lot of capital really quickly. I think the other thing that was really amazing to us and surprising to us, having just been focused on single family, was the kind of returns you could get. And now that we've actually bought our own property, one of the things that surprised me is how easy it was to do the financing. Single family, you got to sign your life away and fill out all these crazy forms, and they want to know your accountant's brothers, in-laws, friends, and it was just a lot easier to do the financing on the multifamily side.
Definitely. No, we get comments like that all the time. I was actually talking to a gentleman the other day who we've done a number of large multifamily deals with, Fannie Mae, millions of dollars of loans. And he's in the process of helping his daughter purchase an investment single family home. And they won't give him a loan. He's retired now. He's got a ton of money in the bank, high net worth, but has no W-2 income. So they won't lend to him. It is amazing. But so you started off with education. You connected with this networking group here in Texas. What came next? I know you started off in some passive investments in multifamily. How did that come about, and how did that go?
Well, coming down here over, course of time and getting to know people and meeting lead investors and becoming comfortable with them, not living local here in the Dallas area, obviously it would be pretty difficult to be a lead ourselves. So we decided that we would put money with other people that we'd come to know and trust, similar philosophies with investments and properties as we do. Through the course of getting to know them, you get to know how they work and how they tick, and the people that you connect with, you tend to think similarly. So we did invest with several people throughout the course of a couple of years, and when we were really happy with how that went, and learning, just from kind of sitting back and watching and reading the emails and looking at the financials as they came out.
I would say we know we picked really good people to invest with, because I think all of them have been on this show, including the person who's sitting across the table from us. One of the properties we invested in was a property in Waco with Rupa and Ricardo.
Exactly.
It's gone really well. Yeah. Thank you for that, by the way.
Absolutely. What are the types of things that you would look for in a passive investment? I mean, obviously, there's got to be a connection with the individual that's running the show, the lead. But what did your box kind of look like? What were you looking for in an investment?
Well, I would say absolutely number one, the most important thing to us was a lead that we were comfortable with, and one that we felt was somebody who would run the business, look out for our interests and such. Second would be the deal. I mean, we would underwrite the deal ourselves, take a look at it. We're much better at underwriting them now than we were when we first started getting into it, but still, we took a look at it. We would run the numbers as if we were, investing in it ourselves. And there's probably a handful of other little things that I can't think of right now, but those were the two most important things for us.
What about market? Was there anything, are most of these deals across the country? Are they in Texas, Michigan?
They're all here.
All here in Texas?
They're all here in Texas, yeah.
And how many deals total?
5.
And units approximately?
927.
All right.
That's pretty specific. Yeah.
And that's in what time span? How long did it take you to accumulate that portfolio?
It was about 18 months. Yeah.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Not bad, especially, out of state. I assume a lot of the lead investors you met here in Texas, or?
Yeah, they're all North Texas folks that we had met through this education and mentoring program. Mm-hmm. And I think we probably wouldn't have done it so quickly, except we had been coming down here for years for the single family and gotten to know a lot of people. So we were already very comfortable with who the leads are and who we thought would be really good leads.
Yeah. So what made you decide to go after property on your own? So you're still in the corporate world, working full time. I assume that worked great for your passive investments, right? That's one of the draws to being a passive investor, is that you don't have to worry about the day-to-day. You're putting your money with someone else that's the captain of the ship and running the show. What brought you to try to go after your own deal?
I think we've always been interested in becoming leads. We weren't sure how to approach it at first, being from out of state. How do you make all the connections that seem to be a little bit easier here with the infrastructure that's already in place, and kind of creating those back at home, is a lot of work. And we always felt that we were capable. We've always been the type of people that are willing to roll our sleeves up and jump in and do some real hard work. But we just weren't sure how to approach it at first, and to kind of mentally think it through. It took us some time to do that until we were ready.
I'm going to tell a humorous aspect
go
of the story. So,
Knew he was going to do this.
So 3 years ago, we attended a multifamily convention down in Houston, and we had been talking about potentially becoming leads. We'd already gotten into some passive deals. And this was, I think, Nicole's first really deep exposure into meeting a lot of the folks who were actively engaged in multifamily. And after spending a weekend talking with different people and meeting so many people that had retired themselves from corporate life, investing in multifamily, she looked at me and she said, "This is ridiculous. We got to get our act together." And that was probably the real starting point from when we were real serious about getting into multifamily.
Excellent. Good story. Before we get into your deal, as a passive investor, because we've got a big audience listening and a lot of passive investors that are looking to get into deals, what are any key learnings, challenges that you had as a passive investor? Any piece of advice that you would give to someone looking to get into a deal passively?
I think Greg already said this, but I would reiterate it, is that just knowing your lead, there's always going to be problems, issues, things that go wrong that come up on a deal that you just don't expect. And having someone that is resourceful, who is committed to whatever the project is that they've undertaken, all of that, it's not rocket science. You just have to work hard and you can figure it out. So if you're comfortable with who that person is and you trust them, trust is a huge thing. It makes it easy when you have that trust. And we've learned from all of our leads and some other leads that we've never been in deals with. Everyone's experienced different issues, and learning from how they've overcome them and hearing their stories makes you feel even more comfortable that you're with the right group.
And just to add to that, I would say that it's good to get in a deal flow, like get to meet a lot of people, start seeing a lot of deals coming across your desk, try to read through them all. And then if you can, get used to underwriting the deals yourself, because once you, at least for me, of course I have an engineering background, but once I start playing with the numbers, then I feel like I get the deal. And it allows you a level of comfort if you can verify some of the information that the lead is presenting. And then if you're doing this over and over again, you can easily spot a good deal from a bad deal.
It's so true. I mean, the more deals you see, the better. Every deal has its nuances. Every deal looks a little different, has its own challenges. And the more times you go through that, the more comfortable you get with uncertainty. I find with a lot of, especially new investors, there are a ton of uncertainties going into the deal, from stuff you don't know about the building, due diligence, financing, what's going to happen after I take over. I mean, the more you see, even if it's someone else's deal, the more you can anticipate and feel better about going forward. So next, tell us a little bit about your first property as a lead. How long have you owned it? How'd you find it? And we can get into those details.
I think the starting place is, we're used to these deals we've gotten into in North Texas, and the networking that is available here and through the education and mentoring group that we're part of is phenomenal in Texas, but it really is very, very limited in Michigan. So the first thing we had to do was start networking with folks, meet a lot of the brokers, meet some other investors, try to get a lay of the land. And that took a long time. It took a long time to build up a good network of that. We found that the brokers up there didn't really play nicely with each other, right? It's not like in necessarily single family where you have a realtor who's putting it out on the MLS and happy for any buyer realtor to come along and sell it. So we had to figure out who had the best inventory, and we constantly go to their websites and see what deals they had, and then try to underwrite them, and then get out there and look at some of the properties. And we probably looked at 20 or 30 properties. Well, I probably looked at 100 of them on paper, and then physically 20 or 30 of them before we started really getting into it. We actually put an LOI in on one property that I'm very glad now we didn't buy, because as we were doing due diligence, it was really ugly. But that also gave us additional confidence that once we found this one, we knew it was the right one.
Going from being a passive and going into finding your own, what was the biggest challenge or possibly the biggest surprise you found making that next leap?
I would say mentally, we were ready. So I think for most people, it's getting to that, but we had kind of eased into that over 4 or 5 years. So that was probably the first big hurdle. The second one was getting the confidence to think that we could do it. We actually purposely chose a smaller property because we were not certain about our ability to raise funds. We chose a smaller property. We actually have a partner who I should mention. His name is Chad Brizendine. He's also up in Michigan. And between our family and his family, we actually funded half of the down payment for this. So we only raised half of the money from outside investors. So by doing that gave us the confidence we could do it. And we were thrilled that we were able to fund our PPM within less than a week.
Outstanding.
So that was probably the two big hurdles. Anything else you can think of?
No, I would just say, putting our team together, and feeling comfortable that we had all the right pieces. Mm-hmm. And as we found out shortly after we took over, we didn't.
Well, we'll get to that here.
That's a good segue, right?
That's a great segue. So the property is where?
Oh, the property's in Romulus, Michigan.
Okay.
I know you're here in Colleyville, which is within, sight of DFW. That's about our location to the Metro Detroit Airport.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, neither you nor our property are in the flight line, so it's very quiet here, which is nice for the podcast. And also, we were surprised looking at the property once we learned where it was. It's actually very quiet. We don't get the airplanes flying overhead, but it's very close to the airport.
So Detroit area.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You've done a ton of investing here in Texas, and now this is Detroit. Give us just Detroit gets a little bit of a bad rap sometimes in the real estate world. Give us some of the pros and cons, Texas versus Michigan or anywhere else in the country.
Okay. Well, first of all, one of the questions we do get is, well, we hear about these other states that are really tenant-friendly, landlord-unfriendly. How's Michigan? Michigan's actually very similar to Texas, so if we could put that one aside. Mm-hmm. But then the second question we always get is, well, we see all these things on the news about $50 properties you can pick up in Detroit, and there's the myth and then there's the reality. Right. And we've actually done a lot of, we've created some presentations to share with people to dispel the myth, but just a couple of data points for you that will help. I mean, the first thing to know is that the city of Detroit is actually fairly small compared to like Dallas. I think it's a quarter of the size from a square mileage perspective. And yes, the city has had some communities that have been very challenged. There's some other communities that are doing very well. But one data point that I love to share with people is if you look at the U.S. Census data, in Metro Detroit, one of the counties is Oakland County. It happens to be where we're located. Mm-hmm. It is actually the 11th wealthiest county on per capita income in the United States. And if you ignore East and West Coast, it's number 2. And I can tell you one thing, it's wealthier than any county in Texas. And so we love Texas. It's been great for investing. So if you keep in mind that there's some areas of Detroit that are actually wealthier than places around here, hopefully that dispels some of the concerns.
Definitely. Good stuff. Good stuff. Because you do hear a lot about that, but it's great to get a different perspective. And you guys are there investing there and know it well. So good stuff. So the property you purchased, Michelle Place Apartments there in Romulus, how'd you find it? Let's start there.
Well, again, we were networking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We found that there were about 4 or 5 brokers in the state of Michigan that seemed to have 80% of the inventory. And if they didn't sell, they threw it on LoopNet. We found that LoopNet wasn't terribly beneficial to us because that stuff was way overpriced. So we found that the best value properties were still on these broker websites. And so I just made a habit of once a week going through and seeing if there's anything new. Mm-hmm. It was kind of a painful process because you got to spend a half hour logging into all of their sites and then checking it out. But one day I was just popping around and found this one there. And I don't know how long it had been there or if it was a new listing, but called up the broker and it seemed like, I think a day later we were going through it and I was like, wow, this is actually pretty good. Mm-hmm. And one of the things is that the bones of it were good. Cosmetically, it needed a lot of help. But it looked like good foundation. The roof was older, but functional. Everything was working. One of the things we really liked about it is the range of rents that the current owner had. He had one tenant that had been there for 20 years that was only paying $540 a month, and then some newer tenants they're paying $695. And so our natural thought was, well, we should be able to get $695 on every single unit if we make them a little nicer and get new tenants in there. And the other thing we noticed is the units that were getting $695 weren't even all that nice looking. So we thought there was some upside from there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. The other thing that we liked was in that particular submarket, when we did the comps, we're in this weird little area where it felt like the area was a little depressed. And so if you go 2 miles, radius out from our complex, the rents were much, much higher, even than the $695. And that was true for also our close competition. So we seemed to be in this little area that needed to be helped a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so we actually, since we took over, and maybe I'm spoiling some of the surprise for later, but we've been working with them to try to bring the whole area up, together as a group, because what's good for us is also good for them. And if some of those complexes that we are competing with, they're much bigger than us. So they can raise their game. They can help us raise our game too.
Absolutely. So you saw some value in the deal. As you're going through the due diligence process, What did the property need to kind of bring it to bright? What did your rehab budget look like? How did that work out?
Again, for the most part, the bones of the property were good. We knew the roof was a little old, so we kind of set aside a little contingency for repairs or replacement if needed. All of the units they're all 2 bedrooms. They all have their own HVAC system. And some of those were pretty old too. So again, we set aside some contingency funds in case we needed to replace them. But other than that, most of the repairs that we knew we needed to do were mostly cosmetic. So our plan was as units turned, it was 100% occupied, by the way, when we bought it. So we knew as tenants moved out, our plan was to fix up the units. We wanted to do, again, some cosmetic to the exterior and the common areas. We recently signed a contract to put in a few more washers and dryers in the place, so some tenant convenience items. But so far, we've had some pretty good success on the rehabs we've done. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we had a few units come vacant shortly after we took over, and we got in those right away and tried to figure out what exactly we were going to do. We had some ideas, of course, before, but when you're actually putting the paper to the pencil and starting to write the checks out and things like that, it's hard to know for sure until you start leasing them out after the rehab. It's like, gee, do we want to spend that much? Are we going to be able to get it? So we really tortured it, I think, in a good way, in that we really thought very hard about all of the money that we were putting in to each of the units. They needed different things. So we didn't just apply a broad brush and say, well, hey, we're going to replace the countertop in this unit, and that unit. Well, one of them needed it and one of them didn't. So we only did what was necessary, and we kept everything that we thought we could. Scrubbed, cleaned, all that kind of stuff, of course. We went to 2-tone paint. We did the 3-inch baseboards. The previous owner had basically just done everything at the absolute positively cheapest he possibly could. And I don't think maybe he ever took his wife into any of the units, because she probably would have said, oh, no, you can't do this. So one example we like to give and tell people is like, there's an outlet, and the outlet itself might be black, right? The switch that's inside the outlet is white, and then the faceplate is off-white. And it just looked awful.
He saved $1.25, babe.
There you go.
And that's about it, right? I mean, those things are not very expensive to do consistently and have them look nice. So, the lighting, the door handles, there'd be a gold one over here and a silver one across the hall. And same with the lighting, there'd be white ones and gold ones. And it just looked ugly, just looked ugly. And so it was the $10 fluorescent light in the kitchen, just spend $40. Oh my goodness, it's not that hard. So, we kind of cleaned everything up. The doors were old. And that was one thing that really turns me off. I don't like the old solid panel doors, the 6-panel doors. They're not that expensive. You paint everything white, make it bright, make it clean. Only replace the things, as I mentioned, sometimes we had to replace carpet, sometimes we didn't. It depended on the unit itself. So we had to turn 3 units fairly quickly. And we have since rented 2 of them out. One has just been put on the market. We've just finished it. And I'll let Greg continue with that.
Yeah, well, all those units, the average unit was priced at $643 a month. Rent when we bought the place. The 3 units we've turned were all around $650, and we got $735 on these ones that we've rehabbed, and they rented out so quickly. We think we probably underpriced them, so we're going to look at pushing those up. And then I think one other thing we've been talking about is potentially moving to RUBS on our resident utility billing system on our water. So we might be able to get some additional revenue just out of the existing tenants.
So right now you're paying all the water, trash.
Landlord pays water, but the tenants, because they have individual HVAC, they're paying individual electric. It's individually metered as well. So they got individual electric, individual gas.
Excellent. So $100 rent bump right off the bat.
Yep.
About how much are you spending on the interiors on average?
Too much.
Yeah.
No, actually, in a joke, but one of the problems we're having is we don't have, again, the network that we do down in Texas. The other thing that we've realized is the skilled trades. A lot of them I mean, we talked about, the Detroit property market got hit just so hard, and a lot of skilled trades left. And so now the skilled trades are in huge demand. And so I talked to some of the leads down here saying, well, how much did it cost you to rehab that or put that backsplash on? And it's usually twice for us. Really? So we knew we overpaid on some of the units that we had to get rehabbed quickly. And what we've been trying to do now is get smarter at chipping away at those costs. So we found some handymen and when we go in to do a rehab, we're portioning out part of it that we know we need a general contractor to do, and then other parts that can go just to a handyman to really start to drive those costs down.
And you don't have any on-site maintenance staff, right?
No, we don't. It's too
units?
Small. It's only 24 units,
okay.
So it's really too small.
Yep.
We haven't told the property management story yet, which I'm sure we'll get to, but now we have a resident manager. So one of our tenants has been hired to kind of help us out on a day-to-day basis, and that's been working out quite nicely so far.
Excellent.
So we've been happy with that. And one of the things that Greg mentioned, I really, really want to do mosaic backsplashes in the kitchen, and we just have not been able to find a cost-effective way to put that in place yet. So we're not doing them. It hasn't seemed to hurt the rent yet, right? So what could we get if we're able to do that, And
we do believe in a best product, best price philosophy. And I must say that even without the mosaic backsplash, if you take a look at the other apartments within a couple miles of us, we're still one of the best looking places. So I do think there's upside for us. And if we can eventually figure out how to do mosaic backsplashes cost effectively, we'll get even more.
Outstanding. So a challenge. We mentioned property management a little bit. So walk through that kind of piece of the puzzle. You both work full time, so you hired a third-party property manager to kick off the project.
And our business partner also works full time.
Okay.
So between the three of us, we're pretty busy people. We have families and other things going on, and we're all very dedicated people, so we have no issues working. However, property management, we understand that we want to give our tenants the resources that they need, and we did not want to take on the day-to-day management. So prior to purchase, we vetted many, I would say maybe 10. Yeah.
Actually, Chad did that, did a good job of it.
Yeah. Vetted about 10 different property management companies. And we decided on one that was based out of the Detroit area, I think the city of, right? And unfortunately, it just didn't work for us. They were more of a mom and pop operation. They did not have systems and processes in place. Rent was not being collected. Late fees were not being assessed. Checks were being lost. Work orders were not being issued. We could not see any of the financials. We couldn't see any of the work orders. The accounting system was abysmal.
We found out once we started having problems too that they ended up buying a very large apartment complex for themselves. Really? And I think it sucked all the oxygen out of the room because 2 months in, we had a month and a half's worth of rent that hadn't been collected.
How quickly did you realize, hey, we've got to make a change?
Well, it was pretty quick. It was pretty quick.
The bank account was empty.
That's a pretty good indication. So we tried to salvage the relationship. We did want it to work, but it just became clear, that it just really wasn't. And so we, with them, collectively decided to part ways. I have to say they were really good working with us, since that decision was made and making sure we were able to pick up anything that had been sent to their office, forwarding information. And I went there multiple times a week to pick things up. And so, we all played nice, which was great. And then we were self-managing. So I, having a finance and accounting background, got into the accounting system. I set it all up by myself and did all the accounting, caught everything up. And then so the three of us, Greg, Chad, and I, could see where we were at because we really had no idea. And once we realized bills hadn't been paid, we were getting late notices, we were getting late fees assessed to, and that we had no rent being collected, I put my walking shoes on and my fingers started dialing the phone and I started working hard to collect all that rent. So I took that part on. And I could go into collections, I think.
She wouldn't want to, but she could. She did a good job.
So a pretty big challenge right off the bat. I mean, this is your first property. You take over and you hire a property management company that you think is going to do the job, and they end up just dropping the ball totally.
Totally dropping the ball, yeah.
So how did you transition? I mean, that's a big hole to climb out of. Walk me through kind of what happened. You kind of took over for a little bit.
We did.
How long did that last? And What came next?
I don't know, it was about a month and a half. Yeah, it felt a lot longer.
It felt a lot longer.
It was stressful. There were nights I didn't sleep very much at all, worried about our passive investors and making sure that we're doing right by them. And so that was pretty stressful. But because we had vetted so many property management companies at the beginning, all we did was go back to our list. Mm-hmm. And as Greg mentioned, Chad had kept very detailed notes, and all we did was call up
number two,
the next one on the list. And the reason we didn't go with them in the first place was because they're about 90 minutes away from our apartment complex. So they're located in Lansing, which it's a hike. Mm-hmm. And although we were very pleased with how they appeared to their processes and their systems, we just felt at the beginning that they were just too far away and it just didn't make sense. But we started those discussions back up with them, and with the using a resident in our complex as a resident manager, mm-hmm. it really made things make much more sense. And their fee schedule and their attention to detail, and they had different people that were in charge of different things, which was one of the issues that we had with the first property management. All roads led back to one person, which is just not doable. They had different people in charge of different things. And so we could have 4 or 5 things being tackled at one time, which is really what we needed, because we had to kind of claw back mm-hmm. to where we should have been in the first place.
And we haven't yet seen the end of December financials from our new property manager, but based on the amount that's in the bank account and the amount that Nicole was able to collect, we think we're pretty close to collecting 100% of the delinquent rent.
Yeah, well, and I got late fees too, don't forget.
Outstanding.
So 110% of the delinquent rent.
I mean, kudos to you guys. I mean, you take it over. You're both still working full-time jobs, mm-hmm. and you just kind of sucked it up and found a way to get it done. I mean, that's amazing.
It was a good experience. I mean, it was a terrible experience, but it was a good experience, and we learned a lot from it.
Absolutely.
I have pictures of Greg and Chad. The 3 of us were at the complex one day, and Greg and Chad were trying to hoist a couch into the dumpster. That was probably I've never laughed so hard. I took my camera out and started taking pictures of the 2 of them trying to hoist this huge couch that somebody had just thrown in the parking lot. It was a pretty good time. Although it was stressful, we had fun with it too at times.
And a learning experience, like you said. I mean, you got to learn from it. So how long have they been in play, the new property management company?
December 1 they started.
Okay.
But just a night and day difference from the prior experience. Yeah. And things are getting done. The units are getting rented out. And the only thing we just haven't seen is December close to know exactly where we ended.
So where do you see the property in general? I mean, what's your overall strategy? I know you're seeing the rent bumps. Occupancy sounds like it's good. What's the longer term game plan for this specific property?
If you go back to the PPM that we created and the pro forma that we gave to our investors, our goal was to achieve an average of $710 a month rent in 3 years' time. And then we applied to that an economic vacancy factor. It looks like we should be able to get there in 1.5 years, hopefully. So we're trying to really accelerate that. From a long-term perspective, again, we were concerned about our ability to raise funds in Michigan from outside of the state investors, which is why we chose a small property. Mm-hmm. But we recognize that the ongoing management of a small property is a little more challenging. So our initial plan was to divest of this after 3 to 5 years, which is what we had told our investors. What we'll do is we'll see how we go. As after 1.5 years, we've achieved our 3-year objectives. We'll talk to our passives and say, hey, do you want to keep holding on to this for a little while, or do we want to look at divesting? So we'll figure out how that one goes. But we're very, very pleased with where we're headed versus our pro forma. And then personally, what we're hoping to do is in a few months, once we make sure that everything's fully stabilized on the original property, is to start looking for property number 2.
And what does that look like? What does your box look like for your next deal?
So we're hoping to go bigger. Mm-hmm. We'd like to be able to have on-site staffing, so that requires, more doors so that you can afford it. Mm-hmm. So we're thinking between 100, 150 units is kind of what we're thinking. However, what we have found, just kind of ancillarily looking to see what's available, it seems in our area there are many complexes that are 400, 500, 600 unit, quite large. And then there's some that are 30, 40, on the smaller side, mm-hmm. kind of where we're at now. There's not a lot in between. Mm-hmm. And so we'll just have to see kind of how it goes. So we'd like 100 to 150, but if the numbers work, the numbers work.
Yeah. Are you open to other markets, or is this, hey, we want to be close to home, we want to be able to drive to the property?
I think in the long run, I mean, we've actually talked about being multifamily leads here in Dallas because it seems like our second home to us now. But I think at least for the next deal and maybe the third deal, we'd probably want to be close to home. I mean, really what we'd like to do is have enough passive income from our real estate, including the next deal, to be able to retire Nicole. And then if the third one is big enough, potentially me as well.
Yeah. So in terms of, so we talked about size, market, the type of deal. Is that a critical fact? What does that box look like? You're looking for big value plays, more cash flowing deals, something in the middle? I mean, what?
For me personally, I tend to like a hybrid deal. So just a little bit of the economics of Detroit, right? It's still dominated by the automotive industry, even though there's some good diversification that's happened over the past few years. So when the country catches a recession, things are like double in Detroit. So we go down twice as fast, we come up twice as fast though. So you got to think about that in terms of the economics of an apartment. And if you got a severe value play that's only 50% occupied and you're not generating enough cash to pay your mortgage and all of a sudden you hit a recession, it's going to get worse. So that's a little scary. On the other hand, if you have a pure yield play that you're just buying it to get a 10% return and all of a sudden you got to cut rent $50 a month, that's a little painful too. So one of the things we like about having a little bit of value in there is if you have the ability to raise rents, but then you hit a recession and temporarily you got to cut rents $50. But well, that's all right. I already raised them 100. So you're better than you were. You had a position that you were cash flowing in already. And so you can survive that little year or two that's a recession and come out the other side in a much better situation.
You two have a wonderful story, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. And I know Ricardo and I both feel that this information is going to be very helpful to the listeners that we're fortunate enough to have. So thank you very much for today, and congratulations on your success.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.